This is Dave Rose, and I will be discussing a subject close to my heart, Star Trek, the role-playing game by Fasa Corporation. Jordan Wiseman of Fasa secured the license for Star Trek in 1982, and over the next few months, Fasa rejected 4 different designs for the game, largely because they all focused too much on combat, which did not fit with Gene Roddenberry's vision of a more utopian future. The 5th version was finally able to provide a workable design, leading to its approval. Released in late 1982, Star Trek, the role-playing game, had a tactical combat system where battles were played on a square grid and based on the Fasa board game called Gravball. Now, a little bit about the Fasa Corporation. Founded in 1980, the Chicago-based company was responsible for some of the most popular tabletop and RPGs of the era, such as Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, Top Gun, Battletech, Shadowrun, and a few more. Moving to digital versions of their games, they became Fasa Interactive, attracting the attention of Microsoft, who bought the company, renaming it Fasa Studio, while integrating it into their Microsoft Game Studios division. Fasa eventually shut down in 2001 and was formally dissolved in 2007. Back to the game. It was originally published as a box set with a 128-page book, another 80-page book, and a 56-page book, 2 counter sheets, and a pair of dice. The creators insisted that the RPG not change into a board game when space combat occurred, so the design team devised a system whereby each head had their own console to operate during combat, and the captain oversaw and coordinated everyone, rather than doing it himself. A major factor to the game's success was the simultaneous release of a line of pewter gaming miniatures. The basic game was released in 1982 as Star Trek the Role-Playing Game, followed by numerous associated components, supplements, and reference work. Aside from live-action canon productions and information created by the Fasa game staffers themselves, the game also included some content from non-canon Star Trek novels and comics. Information from the Star Trek animated series that was still considered non-canon was also incorporated into the game's content, as it too was covered by Fasa's licensing. Conversely, information and designs from the Fasa game have been influential in subsequent Star Trek novels, comics, and games. And because there still was little available in the way of official in-universe information at the time outside the film productions, fans and production staffers alike started to consider the information provided in the game as quasi-canon, or fanon. Despite the non-canonical nature of the game, content created by Fasa designers has even influenced later Paramount productions, including some elements in early canon Star Trek The Next Generation era filmed Star Trek productions. Star Trek the role-playing game is set in the Star Trek universe before Star Trek The Next Generation. Most player characters are members of Starfleet engaged in space exploration missions. They typically hold senior posts on a starship bridge and visit alien planets as part of landing parties. The game's published supplements and modules are mostly set in the original crew movie era, around 2280s to 2290s, but a few are set during the original TV era, around 2260s, or a century later in the Next Generation era, 2360s to 2370s. Now let's take a moment to go over a few differences between Fasa Trek and Canon Trek. The game's depiction of the Klingons, the result of work by science fiction author John M. Ford, differs greatly from later canon. Ford's Klingons not only appear in the supplement The Klingons from 1983 for the game, but also in his Star Trek novel The Final Reflection, which is told almost entirely from the Klingon perspective. Ford designed his Klingon society to provide a logical basis for the actions and statements of on-screen Klingons in the original TV series, as well as the differing appearance of the Klingons in the original series and those in the Star Trek The Motion Picture. The only movie featuring Klingons to have been released when the novel and game supplement were first published. They are guarded by a philosophy expressed in their Klingonese language as Komarex tel Kesterex, roughly translated as that which is not growing is dying. Komarex referred to any structure growing and expanding its control over its surroundings, is also their word for their empire, Komarex Klingon. This leads to the belief that the proper role of species not part of Komarex is to serve those that are, and the Klingons have subjugated many of these servitor species, Kuve, in their conquests. The philosophy also motivates their actions on a personal scale, with individuals engaging in schemes and intrigue to enhance their personal wealth and that of their extended family, and generates traditions like starship officers being promoted as a result of assassinating their superiors. Now, the Klingons seen in Star Trek The Motion Picture, or, as the game defines them, Imperial Klingons, are the original natives of the Klingon homeworld, Kinzai. The ones seen in the TV series are human fusion Klingons, a result of genetic engineering combining the DNA of humans and Imperial Klingons into a hybrid, better able to work in environments occupied by humans and thought to better understand them for purpose of fighting them. There were also Romulan Klingon fusions, as well as other possible hybrids, such as the Orions, whose space was touching both the Klingon Empire and the Federation of Planets. The Klingons, as written by Ford, at least those serving in the Space Fleet, believe that when they die, they will serve in a Black Fleet in the afterlife. Given the fact that few stars are visible at night on most of Kinzai due to cloud cover, they have a mystical reverence for the naked stars and believe they remember acts of courage performed under them. In contrast, the Klingons in Star Trek The Next Generation and subsequent TV series, as well as the later movies, have a culture and tradition based more on a cross between the Vikings and Japanese samurai, focused on personal and familial honor and placing value on sacrificing their lives for the cause they serve. The canonical Klingon Empire is governed by the High Council, led by a chancellor instead of an emperor. Their language is different from Ford's Klingonese, and their homeworld is Kronos. There was no canonical explanation for the differing appearances of Klingons in the original TV series compared to the movies and The Next Generation. In the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode, Trials and Tribulations, the matter was joked about but left unexplained. In the Star Trek Enterprise episodes Affliction and Divergence, it is explained as an infection caused by an attempt to infuse Klingons with the DNA of Kon Noonien Singh, a variation of the human fusion idea that was proposed in Star Trek The Role-Playing Game. As for the Romulans, when the game was first published, the only film material featuring the Romulans were the two original series episodes Balance of Terror and The Enterprise Incident. Fasa's Romulans are the descendants of prehistoric Vulcans transplanted to the planet Romulus by the species known as the Preservers, who were mentioned in the Star Trek original series episode The Paradise Syndrome. Before developing interstellar travel, Romulan science concluded that they were not native to their planet, leading to a social and religious goal of building a road to the stars to find the gods that placed them there, leading to the establishment of the Romulan Star Empire. The Romulans are one of the Federation's chief antagonists in Star Trek The Next Generation, featured in many episodes, and canon explanation of their origin is given in that series. They are the descendants of Vulcans who did not agree with Surak's doctrine of logic and emotional suppression, instead choosing to leave Vulcan and travel through the vast distance of space to their new homeworld of Romulus. A little-known fact about Star Trek the role-playing game is that it first introduced how humans initially encountered the Romulans and the Klingons. While the depiction of the Romulan War from the supplement of the same name ended up radically different from what was shown on Star Trek Enterprise, it nonetheless informed the views of an entire generation of fans. The supplement on the 4 Years' War, which depicted a conflict between the Federation and the Klingon Empire more than a decade before the events of the original series, would inspire fan fiction, fan films, as well as the first season of Star Trek Discovery, which envisioned a similar, although shorter, conflict. Another notable difference between Fasa Trek and canon Trek is the area known as the Triangle, which introduced the concept of a frontier area in a region where the borders of the United Federation of Planets, Klingon Empire, and Romulan Star Empire met. The supplements, Trader Captains and Merchant Princes, the Triangle, and the Triangle Campaigns allowed players for the first time to create characters that were not Starfleet officers. The supplements also opened up a whole new, unexplored side of civilian life, something that would be further explored nearly a decade later on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The supplements also went into great detail about the economics and trade of the future. At this point, I'm going to briefly go over the game mechanics. The game is based on percentile rolls obtained with a pair of 10-sided dice. Character stats are listed for dozens of skills with a percentage rating, and dice rolls are made against set difficulty targets, the player's skill rating, or a combination of both, plus any bonuses or difficulty modifiers to see if your character was successful in completing a task. The higher the level of the skill, the greater the chance a roll would succeed, as rolls were required to be equal to or less than the skill. As was common with role-playing games of the era, numerous tables and charts filled the game manuals for character creation, equipment data, and skills. The game also used different styles of maps for miniature play. In ground-based scenarios involving the player's characters, a square-based map was used, as was common with other role-playing games of the era. In space scenarios, such as ship combat, hex-based maps were used instead, allowing a wider range of motion from one space to the next. Star Trek, the role-playing game, had nearly 4 dozen supplements and expansion modules released between 1982 and 1989. During this time, Fasa was one of the main contributors, filling the gaps in Star Trek lore and influencing canon even decades later. But as they say, all good things come to an end. Paramount was unhappy with Fasa's 2 Star Trek The Next Generation supplements, including an officer's manual published in 1988 and first-year sourcebook published in 1989, which they felt did not entirely match their view of the Next Generation universe. And in 1989, Paramount pulled Fasa's license for Star Trek. The main reason for Paramount marketing and licensing department ending the relationship was its desire to establish a more coherent franchise approach by exercising a firmer grip on content and continuity. This new approach was exemplified by Paramount's express displeasure with Fasa's Next Generation publications, which contained information upon release that was already contradicted by aired episodes, instantly rendering them non-canonical. Some reports stated that the increasingly warlike, aggressive nature of the game, in its game supplements especially, was an additional reason for the franchise's disenchantment with Fasa, specifically a supplement about the Starfleet Marines and a related game involving a scenario where the Federation preemptively attacks the Klingon and Romulan empires, which was in development at Fasa at the time of its license retraction. Despite being out of print for over 30 years, thousands continue to play this groundbreaking game, both in person and on the internet. Fasa's Star Trek the Role-Playing Game manuals can even be found in online stores or as downloadable PDFs. Even with its occasional complexity when managing skill charts, the game is great. No matter what race or faction you choose, the player has vast options in character creation, custom starships, allegiances, and more. And this is well complemented by the massive amount of information created by Fasa to supplement and expand the Star Trek history, which was unwritten at the time. If you like Star Trek and role-playing games, you may want to consider checking it out. Until next time, live long and prosper.